He looked me up and down like I didn't belong there. Like the sight of me standing in first class was some kind of mistake. I had just settled into seat 1A window side when I noticed him walking down the aisle. The pilot, tall, middle-aged, carrying that stiff posture people mistake for authority. He slowed when he saw me, eyebrows rising in a way that wasn't curiosity, it was judgment. He didn't even bother to hide it. "Ma'am," he said, tilting his head, "are you sure you're in the right seat?" The words hit harder than they should have. I kept my voice even. "Yes, this is my assigned seat." He gave a thin, polite smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Do you have your boarding pass?" I handed it to him without a word. He glanced at it, frowned like it personally offended him, then looked back at me. "I see," he muttered. "It's just, we have a strict policy on upgrades. First class is reserved." I didn't get an upgrade. I interrupted, still calm. "I bought my ticket." His eyes flickered, just for a second. But instead of apologizing, he gave a clipped nod and walked away, saying something to a nearby flight attendant. She shot me an apologetic look. I sat there in silence, my hands folded, heart pounding, not out of shame, but from the sheer weight of having to prove I deserved to sit in a seat I paid for. It wasn't the first time I'd been doubted, but something about this man's smugness made my blood boil. He saw a black woman in first class and couldn't wrap his head around it. He had no idea who I was, but he'd find out. They never see you coming when you walk in quiet. That's something my grandmother used to say, and she was right. I've always been the quiet type, observant, careful, the kind of woman who lets others talk first, then makes her move. I'm in my late 30s now, and I've learned how to let silence work for me. Silence makes people show who they are. I'm a well-dressed, soft-spoken black woman who doesn't wear her success on her sleeve, and because of that, people underestimate me all the time. That pilot today. He's not the first. Growing up, I knew what the world expected of me, and what it didn't. I was raised by parents who worked hard, gave everything they had to give, and still came up short some months. They told me straight, "You'll have to be twice as good to get half as far." So I worked. I studied. I sacrificed. I didn't have the luxury of stumbling my way through life. I had to move like I was being watched, because I was. Scholarships, internships, late nights at the office when others had already gone home. I climbed my way up through an industry that wasn't built with women like me in mind, but I kept going. Now, I'm a senior executive at one of the biggest aviation companies in the country. I sit at tables most people don't even know exist. I help shape policy. I make decisions that ripple through the industry, but I don't lead with titles. I don't flash my badge or demand recognition. I walk in quiet. I listen. And when I speak, it matters. That's why I booked that first-class seat. Not because I needed luxury, but because I had a job to do. You see, today wasn't just a flight. It was part of an internal quality inspection. Anonymous, of course. We do these unannounced, to see how airline staff treat real passengers, especially the ones who don't look the part, and believe me, I knew exactly what I was walking into. I've read every complaint that's come across my desk. I've seen patterns, especially on this route, and especially with this crew, but even knowing that, I still wasn't ready for the way that man looked at me, like I was invisible until I made him uncomfortable, like I'd broken some unspoken rule by daring to exist in a space he didn't think I earned. He saw my skin, my hair, my posture, and drew his own conclusions. What he didn't see was the power I carry, and that's the part that always gets them. Back in the present, I could feel his eyes still on me as he spoke quietly to the flight attendant. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught enough. "Are you sure she's in the right seat?" he asked, not even trying to lower his voice. The attendant, a younger woman with kind eyes, glanced at me and then looked back at him. "Yes, sir. 1A. Ticket was scanned. Everything checks out." I could see her shift uncomfortably. She knew this wasn't standard protocol. I could feel the tension ripple through her body. The pilot, clearly annoyed, gave a short laugh, more like a scoff, and muttered, "Right, just making sure we haven't dropped all our standards." He didn't say it to me. He didn't have to. It was loud enough for everyone in the first-class cabin to hear. My face burned. I didn't say a word. I could feel the humiliation crawling up my neck, but I swallowed it. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I adjusted my seatbelt, looked out the window, and focused on breathing. Then the man in seat 1B, next to me, a middle-aged businessman in a tailored navy suit, leaned over slightly. "Hey," he whispered, "don't let him get to you. Some people just, don't handle change very well." He smiled like he was doing me a favor, like I should be grateful someone like him was on my side. I gave a tight smile back, but didn't respond. He meant well, I suppose, but I didn't need his pity. His tone still had that edge of surprise, like he too had questioned why I was sitting next to him, until the flight attendant confirmed it. No one asked the white man in 2A if he belonged there. The pilot eventually disappeared into the cockpit, but the damage was done. I sat there in silence, trying to focus on the upcoming inspection, but my mind was spinning. It's one thing to be invisible, that I'm used to, but being seen and immediately treated like a mistake, that stings in a different way. I could feel other passengers glancing my way, not all of them, but enough to notice. I've lived with this long enough to recognize the looks, the mix of curiosity, discomfort, and quiet judgment. Even the flight attendant seemed flustered for the rest of boarding. I saw the way she avoided eye contact with me, like she felt guilty for being caught in the middle. I thought about confronting the pilot, right then and there, flashing my badge, telling him exactly who I was, but no, that's what he would expect. An emotional reaction, a scene, something he could twist later to justify his behavior. I wasn't going to give him that. Instead, I leaned back, placed my noise-canceling headphones over my ears, and let the hum of the cabin take over. Let him think he'd won. Let them all get comfortable, because when the plane landed, I wasn't walking off as just another passenger. I had work to do. I wasn't just flying. I was inspecting. This flight wasn't a random trip or a weekend getaway. It was assigned, chosen. Every detail from the seat selection to the departure time had been coordinated. I was part of a discrete internal audit team that monitored staff conduct, customer service, and adherence to airline policies, and we did it silently, without warning. That pilot didn't know it, but he'd been flagged weeks ago. The company had received several complaints about him. Most were subtle, hard to prove, easy to brush off. Passengers said he made them feel unwelcome, or that he spoke to them with an attitude. But nothing that crossed the obvious line, nothing that screamed misconduct on paper, until we looked deeper. When we layered those complaints with incident reports, employee feedback, and passenger demographics, a pattern started to emerge. His attitude shifted depending on who was in the cabin. Women, people of color, younger professionals, he treated them differently. Less respect, more suspicion. So, I was sent in to see for myself, not as an executive, not with my badge and title, just as a passenger with a first-class seat, and a calm demeanor, and I hadn't even taken off before he showed his true colors. The inspection had only just begun, and he'd already failed the simplest test, treating a paying passenger with basic respect. I'd done this kind of audit dozens of times. Some staff passed with flying colors, and I made sure they were recognized. Others didn't realize their moment of arrogance was the very thing that would undo them. The beauty of silent authority is that no one sees it coming. While he was muttering under his breath and questioning my right to sit in 1A, I was mentally taking notes, not just about what he said, but how he said it. His tone, his posture, the way he smirked after the flight attendant walked away. He thought he was untouchable, that a few polite words and a captain's badge gave him the right to decide who belonged where. But in a few hours, the flight would land, and when it did, he'd find out exactly who I was, and why this flight would be the one he'd never forget. He thought his charm made him untouchable. Captain Raymond Fields. 10 years ago, he was considered one of the best, polished, charismatic, and confident. Passengers loved his smooth voice over the intercom. Flight crews said he was easy to work with, at least back then. But something had shifted over the years. Maybe it was complacency, maybe it was ego, or maybe he was always like this, and it just took time for people to notice. The first complaint came 2 years ago. A young black woman said he spoke down to her when she asked a question about a gate delay. She said he made her feel like she was a problem instead of a customer. It was dismissed as a misunderstanding. Then a flight attendant reported that he referred to a group of elderly Latina passengers as confused little ladies over the intercom. She said it felt off, but nothing in the manual technically broke a rule. 6 months later, a veteran flight attendant filed a formal grievance. She said Captain Fields often rolled his eyes when she spoke, refused to make eye contact, and once told her, "You're not the one flying the plane, sweetheart. Let me do my job." But again, it didn't go anywhere. He had seniority, a clean flight record, a charming smile when the higher-ups were watching. No one had the full picture, until now, until the internal audit team started collecting the fragments. The quiet stories. The patterns no one noticed on their own. That's what I was here for. To connect the dots. This flight wasn't about catching one moment of rudeness, it was about confirming what we'd suspected for a while, that Captain Fields treated people differently, based on how they looked, sounded, or carried themselves. He was smart enough to stay just on the edge of professionalism, but not smart enough to realize someone was watching. And today, all of his small acts of disrespect were about to come together and cost him more than just his reputation. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, I stayed still, calm, collected. While passengers gathered their things and stood in the aisle, I remained seated, watching Captain Fields through the crack in the cockpit door, as he laughed with the co-pilot, completely unaware. He had no idea what was coming. When the crowd thinned and the first-class cabin was nearly empty, I stood, walked over to the flight attendant, and spoke quietly. "Could you please let Captain Fields know that passenger 1A would like a brief word, privately?" She blinked, uncertain. "Of course, I'll let him know." Moments later, he stepped out, his expression polite but distant, the same false charm he probably used 1,000 times before. "Yes?" he asked, voice tight with control. I nodded once. "Is there somewhere we can speak?" He hesitated, but gestured toward the jet bridge. We stepped just outside the aircraft, out of passengers' earshot. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my ID. His eyes dropped to the badge, his mouth opened slightly, then closed. "I believe," I said slowly, "you were interested in seeing my credentials earlier. Consider your wish granted." He blinked hard, the color draining from his face. "I didn't realize." "No, you didn't. And that's the point." I took a breath, keeping my tone even. "Captain Fields, I've been conducting an anonymous audit. Today's flight was part of a larger review of passenger experience, staff conduct, and in-flight professionalism. Your name came up multiple times in internal complaints." He started to speak, something about misunderstandings and long shifts, but I held up a hand. "You didn't ask the man in 2A for his ticket. Or the couple in 3C. You only questioned me. You made assumptions, challenged me publicly, and spoke in a tone that violated our code of conduct." "I didn't mean to offend anyone," he stammered. "If it came off that way, I apologize. Truly. I was just trying to ensure that someone like me didn't belong in first class." I finished, watching him flinch. "I didn't mean it like that. But that's how it came across. And it's not the first time." He was pale now. No more smirks. No more arrogance. Just a man realizing the ground beneath him was cracking open. "I'll be submitting my full report to the board," I said, turning to leave. "They'll decide what happens next." He opened his mouth again, but I didn't wait to hear it. Because this time, I had the final word. I paused before stepping away. I needed to make it clear. "This isn't just a warning, Captain Fields." I looked him directly in the eye. "Effective immediately, you are grounded." His jaw dropped slightly, but he said nothing. "You'll be placed on administrative leave pending formal review. Until then, you won't be flying any aircraft under this company's name." He opened his mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. The confidence he wore like armor just an hour ago had completely shattered. "This isn't personal," I added, my voice steady. "It's about accountability. You've had multiple chances to course correct, and you chose not to." I won't let your behavior keep repeating. Too many people have been disrespected, silenced, or made to feel small. That ends here. The silence between us was thick. For the first time since I met him, Captain Fields didn't look superior, he looked lost. He knew this wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was the beginning of a reckoning. And I wasn't just speaking for myself, I was speaking for every person he ever dismissed, doubted or demeaned. I gave him one final look, then walked away. I didn't need to hear whatever excuse he was trying to gather. The message had been delivered. And for once, it was heard loud and clear. As I walked through the terminal, pulling my small carry-on behind me, I let the weight of the day settle. Not heavy, more like the closing of a chapter that had been begging to end. There was something deeply ironic about it all. He looked me up and down, and assumed I didn't belong. But I was the one holding his career in my hands. He saw a woman who didn't fit his image of first class. He never imagined I was the one sent to decide if he still belonged in the cockpit. That's the danger in judging people by what they look like, how they speak, or where they choose to sit. They never expect the quiet woman to be the one with power. I've spent years learning how to stay composed when dismissed. How to stand tall when questioned. How to wield influence without ever raising my voice. Not because I had something to prove, but because I knew what I carried, and who I carried it for. For the ones overlooked. The ones brushed aside. The ones who know what it feels like to be questioned just for existing in a space they earned. When I reached my gate for the connecting flight, I took my seat with a quiet smile. No one questioned me this time. No looks. No doubt. Just the hum of a new journey waiting to take off. Because I knew exactly who I was, and where I belonged. And to anyone still unsure, let this be the reminder. Never doubt a quiet woman with power. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Have you ever been underestimated, looked over, judged, or told you didn't belong, only to prove them completely wrong? Share your story in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you rose above and stood in your power, and remember this. Never judge someone by what you think they are. The quietest person in the room might be the one holding all the power. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a little reminder of their worth.